Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. I just got back from Arkansas a few hours ago. I am exhausted. I spent 3 days down there with Johnny doing a bunch of core tackle planning for 2026. We got some really cool stuff planned that I think a lot of you are going to be very, very interested in. So you're going to have to stay tuned for that. The unfortunate part is yesterday, Johnny dropped me off at the Fayetteville airport and I didn't get home until today, so it took me 19 and a half hours. I ended up having to sleep in in Chicago's O'Hare Airport, which was not fun. So I'm running on a few fumes in the tank right now. But I did want to put out a video still, and I did get a good suggestion that I read while I was sitting in the airport, where it was just somebody wanting to know how to approach largemouth and smallmouth. Like, what are the differences between the two species? And not necessarily like just, where do they live, but more like how do they relate? That's what the angler wanted to know. How can they take what they learn about largemouth and smallmouth and apply it to their fishing? And to me, that's a really good question. It's not, that's, to me, that's a more important question than, what baits are the best baits for smallmouth. I personally feel like you truly become a better angler when you understand the fish's realm, meaning, no matter what species you're after, maybe it's smallmouth, maybe it's muskie, maybe it's tuna, it doesn't matter. But you'll be a much better angler if you understand everything you can about those fish, everything from their seasonal migrations, the forage species that they eat, where the forage live, what they do differently as water temperatures change. And the more you can learn about a species, the better the angler you're gonna become, because you learn how to target them better. And understanding some of the nuances between largemouth and smallmouth will make you a better angler for both of those species. So I wanted to do this video. I thought this was a good one I could do when I got home, because I sat in the airport literally thinking about some of the different main points. And I think there's some very valuable ones to learn. So we're going to share those with you. Before I do want to remind you, though, that if you want to support the channel and you're looking to purchase tackle for either largemouth or smallmouth, and you want to support the channel, use my Tackle Warehouse affiliate link. I put that in the video description for you. It's very much appreciated. Okay, so the first thing that I think is one of the most critical thing, and these aren't necessarily in any specific order. I think they're all very important. In my opinion, though, largemouth and smallmouth are different with respect to their movements on a daily basis. I personally believe that largemouth are much more homebodies than smallmouth. Smallmouth are willing to roam much wider areas throughout the course of the day. Now, that doesn't mean you don't have a fish that relates to a boulder and will stay there. But I think oftentimes the smallmouth is much more willing to roam to find those pieces of cover. Largemouth generally like to kind of hang out in the areas where they feel more comfortable. And an example of this has to do with a lot of the studies that have been done on release fish from tournaments. What they find is that largemouth generally stay in the same area that they're released, or at least will go to the nearest cover that fits them better. Generally speaking, that's where the tournaments go out of, because if you're on a bigger body of water where there isn't good largemouth habitat around, if you think about a place like Leech Lake is a good example. You've got your main basins, and then you have the bays. Most of the largemouth stay in the bays, but on a giant lake like that, generally speaking, the boat ramps are not right on the main lake anyways. They're back in the bays where you have a little bit more protected water, so that it makes it easier to launch your boat. Well, the largemouth generally will stay in those areas where they're released, versus smallmouth, which they find will go, travel 30 miles. They'll travel all over the place. And I think you also see it more from winter to summer as well. I think smallmouth travel further from their wintering grounds to where they're at potentially in the summer. Now, I know that this is all debatable, and I know it is really dependent on specific lakes as well. If you've got a small body of water and there's a prime area for smallmouth, that's where they're going to be. The same thing can be said for largemouth as well. But I do think in general what you find are smallmouth are much more willing to roam. And a lot of times that just has to do with a bigger area. They may use the same areas, the same specific pieces of structure, but they'll roam miles at a time sometimes. Largemouth just don't do that. Which is one of the reasons why you probably have heard people talk about, from a smallmouth perspective, they're here today, gone tomorrow. Like in tournaments, they can be a great thing to hit when you're there, but you can't always count on them for a multi-day tournament. That's because they move quite a bit. So that's one thing. Another thing has to do with the bottom contour. Smallmouth generally don't like to be in areas with soft bottoms. Soft bottoms could be, mud. It could be like silt. It could be like sunken bogs, things like that. Smallmouth don't like that. Smallmouth like hard bottom areas. They want sand. They want gravel. They want rock. Generally speaking, you just don't find nearly as many that'll push up into, backwater type areas where you will catch a lot of largemouth. Largemouth will definitely use your marshy, boggy areas. So if you've got some mud bottom areas, largemouth will be in them. Largemouth actually prefer them in a lot of instances because a lot of times that's where you get some of your best weed growth. Smallmouth aren't going to be in that. You might catch a random one here or there, but generally speaking, they're not going to be in it. So recognizing the bottom contour and the structure is important. Another thing has to do with bait selection. I do think in general you talk about using bright colored lures working well for bass at times, but I personally believe that your really bright colors, your fluorescent colors like chartreuse and hot pink and blaze orange, to me those are much better at triggering bites from smallmouth, especially in clear water, than for largemouth. I think when you're talking about really muddy conditions or some special one-off instances, bright colors can work great for largemouth. But as a whole, they work much better for smallmouth. It's one of those things where a lot of times you can't have a bait that is too obnoxious and too bright. It actually makes them more aggressive, a lot more than it does largemouth. So don't feel like from a bait selection standpoint, you can ever try a wrong color with smallmouth. Some days they want your natural colors. They want black. Some days they want green pumpkin. Some days they want hot pink. It's just one of those things. I think with largemouth, if you were to go to the store to buy tackle, you're probably just better off picking some of your natural colors versus working in some of your hot, bright colors. Smallmouth, you absolutely want to have some of those crazy fluorescent colors, at least on a portion of the bait. Maybe not the whole bait, but at least on a portion. Another main difference between the two is that when talking about smallmouth, you can never have too much current. Now, I understand during the winter periods, yes, you can potentially have too much current. But if you're talking about pretty much the other three main seasons, smallmouth will be in current that's so fast you can't even fish it. And I'm literally talking about rapids and whitewater. They'll be in this much water and it'll be rapids, and they will be in that. Largemouth don't use that. Largemouth might be on the outskirts of some of the heaviest current you can find in some of the current seams and just kind of some of the back current areas. But generally speaking, the smallmouth will seek out the fastest current possible. Largemouth like current. They definitely like current, but they're much more of a nice meandering current versus something that's just ripping to the point where sometimes you can't even fish it. So don't ever think that you've got current that's too strong for smallmouth, but you can have current that's too strong for largemouth, in my opinion. And then the last thing just has to do with grass growth in general. I would say the majority of the time, if you're fishing grass, submergent or emergent, you're in much more of a largemouth area than a smallmouth area. Now, having said that, if you are in an area where you have patchy grass growth and you've got hard bottoms, so hard packed sand or gravel or rock, you absolutely can catch some smallmouth mixed in. but you're generally in more largemouth territory. Largemouth would much rather get into the grass than smallmouth, which like to utilize grass edges, but they generally don't get real deep in it. You know, largemouth, you can go flip up, you know, in milfoil fields and hydrilla fields and things that are just really thick. And you'll occasionally catch a smallmouth when you're on a good smallmouth lake doing that too. But it's like 90% of the fish you catch in that will be largemouth to 10% smallmouth. If you're looking for smallmouth around grass, which can be a good way to go about, there are a lot of smallmouth that use it. You're just usually going to be either looking for a much more defined edge, like a clean edge where you have, you know, that hard packed area, or you've got patchier grass with nice, good, clean sand patches or gravel patches mixed into the grass. So smallmouth will use it, but I personally feel like the smallmouth like to be near it and they relate to the grass versus largemouth, which are in the grass. Like you got to go in the grass to get them a lot of times. So just keep that in mind as well. But those are some of the main differences that I was thinking of while sitting in the airport. I'm sure there's a lot more, but if you just utilize that information and apply it to the lakes that you fish, you'll put yourself in areas that are largemouth and put yourself in areas that are more predominantly smallmouth, and it should help you catch more fish. So let me know in the comment section, what are some of the things that you guys think are big differences between the two species as well, so that other people can learn from you. Thanks for watching. I appreciate all the support. If you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and hit that subscriber button and stay tuned. We'll have a new video coming out tomorrow.